If you've been using the Hemingway app I showed you in a previous lecture, you may have noticed this little box in green. And as you can see, it highlights examples of what's called the passive voice in your writing. And if you spent any time around writers, you'll know that it's a scientific fact that given enough time, every writer is going to eventually quote at you at least one of George Orwell's 5 rules for writing. And one of those rules is this. So what's this deal about the passive? Why are we writers so darn down on it? And what's it got to do with storytelling anyway? Well, stick around for the next 2 lectures because you're about to find out. First, I want to start by explaining what we mean by passive. Now, some of you will already know this, but stick around because I'm going to be talking about why the passive can drag down your writing a little bit. But first, a quick grammar recap. In English, verbs, those doing words that we all know and love, can be used in 2 ways. They have 2 forms, active and passive. Let me show you an example. This is an example of an active sentence, and I'm starting with the active sentence because it's actually easier. And this sentence, you'll recognise it possibly as the title of a famous Bob Marley song. Now, one of the things that makes a sentence is that it has a verb. All sentences must have a verb, those doing words. You can't have a sentence without a doing word, so let's identify it in this sentence. That's right, shot. Now, this sentence also tells us who was doing the verb. The actor in this case is I. In grammar speak, this I would be called the subject, but I'm going to keep things simple and I'm going to call them the doer. This sentence also tells us who was affected by the verb, the person who was shot, i.e. the sheriff. In grammar speak, this person would be called the object of the sentence. But I'm going to call them the doee because they are the person to whom something was done. Now let's compare that sentence with this sentence, which is in the passive. In this sentence, rather than somebody doing something, something is done to somebody else. Now it's telling you exactly the same thing, but in a different way. It's the same doing word, to shoot, but in a different form. So, was shot instead of shot. And this is the passive form of the verb. But what we also see in this sentence is that the positions of the doer and doee have been reversed. In the passive sentence, it starts with the doee, the person to whom something was done. Similarly, the doer, the person doing the verb, has been relegated to the end of the sentence. Now let's step back from the grammar for a moment. Just looking at those 2 sentences, ask yourself which one you instinctively prefer. I mean, it's clear which one Bob Marley preferred because he called his song I Shot the Sheriff. And are you with Marley and Hemingway and Orwell and me and every other writer out there? Do you, given the choice, prefer the active voice? And if so, why? Well, first off, the active sentence is a little bit shorter, 4 words rather than 6. And that's one good reason to avoid passives if you can. On a related note, though, they're also more complex. The doing word has 2 parts, was and shot, and the doer has to be introduced by this word by. Now, I've been learning Italian on and off for several years now, and I've never got to the passive. Active sentences are just easier and more natural to start with when you're learning a language. So that's something to bear in mind if your readership includes people whose first language isn't English. So again, on a related note, the short, simple, active sentence is punchier and more dynamic because we're being presented with someone actively doing something, a doer doing something, rather than someone having something done to them. And that passive version of the sentence, the sheriff was shot by me, it's a bit clunky, isn't it? a bit strange sounding. And if we do the same thing with some other song lines, we can see that they also don't quite work in the passive. Don't remember Mick Jagger singing that, do you? Again, not a song that set the disco floors alight in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, not Beyonce's greatest moment, that one. So just to sum up, some reasons to prefer the active voice rather than the passive voice if you can. Active sentences are shorter, they're simpler, and they're just more dynamic. So do use the Hemingway app to root out any rogue passives in your writing and see if you can rework them to make them more active. I'll leave it there for now, and in the next lecture I'm going to be giving you some more reasons to avoid passive sentences, especially if you want to tell stories that inspire your readers.